Thank you for tuning in to listen to this video presentation for the LFG 2020 online conference. My name is Joey. I'm currently a postdoc at SOAS University of London, and my presentation is about F structure and S structure of complex predicates in Urdu. A lot of this presentation is going to be background on the works that my proposal is building on. That's section 2 on Butt's work and others on Urdu complex predicates. Section 3 on Lowe's proposal for reanalyzing Urdu complex predicates under a different set of assumptions. And then in section 4, a recent publication by Andrews trying to solve a problem that came up in Lowe's analysis in regard to scope. And then finally, my proposal. So if at any time you feel like you're already familiar with parts of these sections, of course, you can just skip forward in this video. And the red dots on the top of the screen, they should indicate how far along the presentation I am if you want to skip ahead to the parts you're interested in. This paper is part of a growing line of research that, in a sense, was started by Asude and Jogolo, of course, building on the work of others, but their proposal was that it's possible to go back to a LFG architecture that doesn't have the A structure, which was originally proposed by Butt, Dalrymple, and Frank in '97. There's been a few different publications that have been building off and exploring different aspects of this proposal, but in this particular talk, we're interested in Lowe's work in the 2015 paper on complex predicates. So specifically, it's going to build, my proposal will build on Lowe's reanalysis of the composition of complex predicates in Urdu, and also interact with a proposal by Andrews in 2018, trying to solve a problem that came up in Lowe's analysis. So this paper proposes an alternate solution to Andrews' solution, one which doesn't require modeling F structure as a hybrid object as Andrews proposed. But in addition, it goes beyond Lowe and Andrews by showing how we could build a connected S structure to model argument structure and other potentially other aspects of lexical semantics in for complex predicates. So just to give an overview of complex predicates, there's been a lot of work on this done, both descriptive and analytical, by Butt and a few colleagues. So many people in LFG are very familiar with this. If not, I'll try to go through some of the basics very quickly of why this is interesting data for syntacticians. In a permissive complex predicate, the particular one that I'll just focus on for this presentation, there's a light verb D, which in other contexts means give, but in this context, it increases the overall valency of the predicate, adding a permitter to the argument structure, in this case, mother. So for example, we would have our basic verb read, and it's, say, agent and patient, the child who's reading a book. And that's sort of the core, the main verb meaning of this predicate. But it's a complex predicate because there's another argument that's licensed by this light verb mother, which is the permitter. From sort of an English-based perspective, it might be tempting to try to analyze this as a complex F structure with control of, say, the object over a covert subject, but this is not a possible F structure analysis. And Butt's shown extensively through a whole number of tests that there is no subject associated with the main verb read in this example. So it's not possible to have a subject embedded in an XComp. And it's also not possible to have an object embedded here because it's quite clear that the book in this particular example is the object of the light verb. And that's quite easy to show just looking at the agreement patterns. So going back to the same example, at least in some contexts, verbs will agree when gender and number with their nominative object in Urdu. So here we see that the verb give, or the light verb D, is in a feminine plural form. The only feminine plural in the sentence is the book, the object. And so even though book is the patient or the semantic argument of read, as in terms of grammatical function, it's the object of give. So that's created quite a puzzle for LFG. The Butt's proposal is quite a detailed procedure for how the pred values of the light verb interact with the pred value of a normal main verb to create this fused new semantic form in the A structure. which interacts with the different parts to create a new F structure. And so the result is a new type of pred, which combines values from two different preds and selects the necessary grammatical functions for to get the right analysis of complex predicates. The general critique of this approach has been that it requires changing our assumptions about pred values, the semantic form, where the standard assumption is that pred values cannot unify. And so this is quite a change from that. And so while it seems necessary under the assumptions that Butt is working with, Andrews and Manning have said it would be desirable if possible to remain within traditional techniques to not go this route. Lowe has also criticized this as stepping away from the general principle of lexicalist syntax, in which things like argument structure are not manipulable in the syntax, which is more or less at least one interpretation of what happens in the A structure in Butt's approach. But this data really does create a challenge. Either semantic forms need to somehow be modified or composed or fused in the syntax, as Butt and others have proposed, or the alternative approach would be to change our assumptions about the content of semantic forms. And that's the approach that Lowe is going to take. So the beginning point is the proposal that part of semantic forms, particularly the subcategorization frames and their role in enforcing completeness and coherence, are made redundant by glue semantics. And this is something that others have brought up in the past and that Lowe is building off of. So this requires at least a brief understanding of glue semantics. So I'll try to just take 2 minutes to go through the basic idea, the intuitions behind glue semantics, in case you're not familiar with that. The basic idea is that lexical entries of verbs have a pred value, and notice that this pred value does not have a subcategorization frame. They also have equations that link grammatical functions to arguments in S structure. And then they have this glue meaning constructor, which has two parts. It has some type of semantic language, in this case, a lambda calculus, just linking the arguments to the predicate. And then it has this glue side, and the glue states which type of objects need to be available in order to produce the right meaning of this sentence. So to give a very brief and rough abstract example, let's say in some sentence we find out that the subject is Godzilla and the object is Kim. Then because of this linking equation, we know that the object, the semantic structure of the object is that of the arg2, and so that allows us to fill in the arg2 on the part of this glue side of this meaning constructor, which is associated with this value y on the left side. So we can fill that in, and we know that the patient of this verb devour is Kim. We also cross off Kim because it's essential in the logic of glue semantics that each object, each resource can only be consumed once. It can only be used once in the derivation. Then again, we look at Godzilla. We know that the subject is the arg1. That can be applied to the proof as well. And we end up with a very simple representation of the semantics of this verb devour. There's two arguments, and both arguments have been crossed off as being consumed. So the basic idea here is that glue semantics is resource sensitive. So each object in the proof can only be used once. Proof will fail if not all of the resources required by the meaning are available. So if you only had an arg1 and not an arg2, then the proof wouldn't work. So that's essentially the same function as completeness in F structure. Proof also fails if a meaning is not consumed. And so if there's a leftover argument that's not used in the glue proof, that also causes the proof to fail. And that's essentially the same function as coherence in F structure. So since subcategorization and completeness and coherence can be handled with glue semantics, it can be divorced from the pred feature, and Lowe takes advantage of that to propose a different kind of F structure for complex predicates in Urdu. So going back to our last example of the mother letting the child read a book, or I put the wrong word right in this particular slide. But anyway, the point is that Low allows this F structure to look as it is, claiming that the light verb has no pred value itself. And although we end up with a set of grammatical functions that we don't expect for this particular main verb, there's an explanation for why we end up with that, which is handled in the semantics in a glue meaning constructor specifically. So the way that Low does that is basically by on the glue side, having a meaning constructor that will consume an arg1 and produce an arg3 and arg1 to be consumed, and that increases the valency of the predicate. So this just arg1 is consumed, and that produces this arg3 and arg1, increasing the valency. And at the same time, on the meaning side, the main verb's predicate gets identified as an argument of the predicate let. All of this is happening in the because of the lexical entry of this light verb. So this, when this whole arg1 with its meaning is consumed, it gets associated with the embedded predicate of this other predicate let. arg3 becomes identified as both the permittee and the agent or actor of the embedded predicate. And the arg1 gets associated with this x, which is the permitter of the argument. So in that way, we get the increased valency, and we also get the right semantics together for this complex predicate. A problem that Low identifies with his analysis is that it doesn't handle cases of more complex situations where there's more than one light verb in a single complex predicate. And so looking at example 4, Tara let Amu have the elephant pinched. There's two valency increasing light predicates here, both the D give, the permissive, and the do, which is the causative. And it's very clear that the meaning is allow to cause. So Tara allowed Amu to cause something to happen and not cause to allow. So you can't interpret this as Tara causing Amu to allow something. Low's approach to this doesn't make this distinction. You can think of that basically as if you have more than one of these mini constructors that can turn an arg1 into arg3 and arg1, you don't know which one operates on which in which order. There's no way to restrict it. And in glue, you want to have that ambiguity for dealing with things like quantifier scope, which can be ambiguous. So Andrews proposes a solution to this problem. And his approach is to develop a more complex F structure. And his approach, the F structure is a hybrid object where the main verb's F structure, at least the pred feature from that main verb, appears in a singleton set. So these hybrid objects are typically used for analysis of coordination, but being used in a more creative role here. And in these kind of situations, at least when needed, you might be able to say that grammatical functions are distributive features. They can be shared by both predicates. But in any case, the motivation for this complex structure is that it allows you to identify a structure within the F structure that can be used or identified in the semantics using a local name. So for example, assuming the F structure that Andrews proposes, we could then, in the meaning of the light verb, refer to a particular F structure, say G, and then which is in this case within the set of the other F structure. So that's this one, the F structure that's in the set of the main F structure. And then once we name that, we can also name it in our glue semantics, and now that's the only one of the verbs that can be manipulated by this semantics. And so we're able to get the order that's we want to be able to get out of this construction by creating this more complex F structure. There's some potential issues with Andrews' approaches. And in part, one of them that Andrews identifies is that there'll be situations where you'll need to stipulate whether certain features are distributive or non-distributive on a construction by construction basis, which typically is not the way that distributive features works. Usually it's assumed to be distributive or not for an entire language. Andrews proposes a solution for that, but doesn't try to oversell it. stating that such undersharing specifications are theoretically somewhat undesirable. So my proposal is is quite similar but simpler than Andrew's proposal to fixing this problem of scope. And that is to analyze the F structure of the main verb, the embedded verb, as the value of a grammatical function. So here I've just arbitrarily labeled that function EP, or embedded predicate, without making any claim to what this grammatical function really is. To be clear, this type of analysis is not at all possible under the standard assumptions of completeness and coherence. It's only possible by assuming that completeness and coherence are handled in the glue semantics, and so that a pred, like the pred read in this example, can appear in the F structure with no grammatical functions accompanying it. It can appear on its own. By placing all the grammatical functions in the F structure of the light verb, the structure still accounts for the evidence of monocausality that we talked about earlier. So it's clear that from the evidence that there is no subject associated with the embedded verb read, and that's true in this F structure representation. It's also clear from the evidence that books in this example is the object of the light verb let, and that's also clear in this representation. And so this matches the empirical evidence for monocausality, for there being a single set of grammatical functions that are associated with this complex predicate. And this also allows us to do what Andrews did, have a local name that can be used in the glue meaning constructor. In this case, the local name would be the value of the F structure's EP function. And this allows us to control for scope, and it does it without making any additional theoretical adjustments other than those that are already proposed to allow glue semantics to take on the role of completeness and coherence. So furthermore, this kind of approach allows us to start to think about what the S structure of complex predicates would be like under these assumptions, and allows a pretty straightforward way of linking grammatical functions to S structures, which is not too dissimilar from what Finley and others have proposed in their discussions of this part of the architecture. So in this particular lexical entry for the verb let, this light verb give or let, the one that's in the permissive construction, unsurprisingly, we associate the subject with the arg1, the highest argument. We associate the object theta with the third argument, argument 3, which is as expected. The innovative part of this would be the value of the embedded predicate, its semantic structure being associated with the value of a sub-event in the S structure. I'm being fairly agnostic about what exactly the sub-event is, what it should be named, or what its characteristic is. But then the second innovation is that the object, instead of being associated with an arg2 as it would be expected to be, is associated with an arg2 that's embedded in a sub-event, or one or more sub-events. And then the arg3 of this S structure is associated with the arg1 of its sub-event. So we can take a look at how this looks. Under this assumption, we have the same kind of F structure that's flat with just one set of grammatical functions, but it links to a complex connected S structure where the arg1 and arg3 are in a higher S structure, but the arg2 is embedded in a lower S structure. So in this permissive event, child is the permittee, and it's also being linked to the proto-agent or actor role here in this sub-event of reading. We call it the example with multiple light verbs. This is to allow a causative event to happen. We can also handle this under similar assumptions. Again, the subject is linked to the arg1, the object theta is linked to the arg3. Arg3 is linked to the arg1 of a sub-event. That sub-event is a causing event. And that causing event specifies its second argument, which is the object. And notice here that the object is embedded inside two sub-events, that's arg2. So this has also been at least partially implemented in XLE and tested on 10 different examples from Badal 2008. The XLE implementation is only partial because it doesn't have a glue component. So that allows a number of ambiguities because what's been simplified in the other representations that these linking equations need to be optional. And it's the glue component that determines which ones need to be used in particular constructions. And this implementation will also show how you can have an additional link for the oblique agents to be linked to an embedded arg1. So I'll just show you this in XLE. So starting with a simple causative here, Amu had the elephant pinched by the child. So this causative event, if we look at it in XLE, we have a structure where Amu is the subject and also the arg1 of the causing event that causes a sub-event. Inside the sub-event, as a pinching event, it has a child acting on an elephant. Child is this oblique agent, and the elephant that's being pinched is the object. So we get the right links between F structure and S structure there. Looking at the more complicated one we've been discussing, Tara let Amu have the child pinch. So this is a permissive and then a causative event. We get the subject Tara is the arg1 of this permitting event. Arg3 of this permitting event is Amu, the secondary object. And then there's a sub-event. The sub-event is arg1. It's a causing event, and its arg1 is Amu, the same as arg3 of the permissive event. And the event that's caused is a pitching event, in which the second argument is an elephant, which is the same as this object here. And a slightly more complex one, in which there is also a oblique agent. We have a subject again linked to the arg1, object 2 linked to arg3 in this permissive event, which is linked to arg1 of the sub-event as before. Sub-event's a causing event as before, and it's a pinching event, and now it's not just the arg2, which is the object, but also we have the arg1, which is the child, the oblique agent there. So in summary, it is at least possible to model the F structure and S structure of at least one kind of Urdu complex predicate without a structure. This might be seen as more of a pilot project or a proof of concept than something comprehensive, but at least it's possible to do it in this approach. And in this approach, we preserve the idea that semantic forms, the values of preds, are non-unifiable, although their role is significantly reduced. And we allow the glue to cover the completeness and coherence. This approach can be implemented in XLE, although it does require for full implementation to have this glue proposal, which is actually also being, this glue module for XLE, which is also being discussed at this conference. And it also allows further exploration of a connected S structure as a locus for representing semantic information, which was represented at A structure in previous analyses. The next steps for this kind of research would, of course, be to expand this analysis to other kinds of complex predicates in Urdu and other languages to see if this really holds up or if there's other sort of fatal errors that would occur in trying to expand this analysis to other types of data. It also raises some question about the templates for grammatical functions and semantic arguments. There was a basic set that was proposed by Finley. This, of course, would augment that set. Of course, would require some exploration of what happens under looking at valency alternations inside complex predicates, whether all of those can be accounted for in this approach. And of course, the wider picture would be what is this connected S structure, what can be represented in there, and how can that be used for further analyses under this glue-based approach to completeness and coherence in LFG. So for the references, you can see the slides that are online. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to hearing your questions.